Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chan, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, we are continuing with Thousand Autumns Volume 2, also known as Qian Qiu by Meng Xi Shi. And you guys, we are at the final stretch, okay? There are just 5 chapters left, so that's about 2 videos from me. I'm super excited to get to book 3. Anyway, I hope you all enjoy the reading of chapters 48 through 50. Chapter 48, Shanhe Tongbei. Xuandu's Violet Palace used to have many sets of sword techniques until my Shifu Qifenge took over. He believed that all martial arts shared the same roots, regardless of how many superficial changes they amassed. Rather than getting caught up in the complexity and ending up with too much to learn, it's better to hone a single set of techniques to the pinnacle of perfection. So he reorganized our many generations of sword techniques, and in the end, only 2 remained. One of them is the Azure Wave sword technique, which he crafted by the East Sea. He saw the sun rise and moon fall, the drifting clouds atop the roiling sea, and he folded all of these experiences into his creation. Then he mixed in the essence of some of Xuandu Mountain's traditional sword techniques. As we happen to be passing by the Yellow River today, we'll be privy to a similar frame of mind. I'll demonstrate the sword techniques to you once. You needn't strain to memorize the moves. Just allow yourself to thoroughly experience the feelings within them. Shiwu had on a very serious face. Earnestly, he cupped his hands. Yes, Shenshi, this disciple will do his best to feel them. Shen Xiao smiled, and then he drew his sword. The stretch of river near where they stood had breached its dike just the year before, flooding the farmland on both sides. Even today, most of the houses remained empty. There was desolation as far as the eye could see. Only the great tides of the Yellow River endured, rushing tirelessly onward as before. At this moment, Shen Xiao stood atop a solitary jutting rock. Beneath him swept the ceaseless surges of the Yellow River, roaring like it wanted to devour all that was in the world. The river water sparkled and gleamed beneath the sunlight, crystal bright and roiling. Shen Xiao's lone figure looked so small and frail, defenseless against nature's might. But the moment he drew his sword, his aura was as radiant as the river's. Shanhe Tongbei reflected a dazzling brilliance, and as the blade rose, its sword qi overflowed. It stirred the river waters to surge ever higher, and Shen Xiao was engulfed in the sword qi. Looking elegant and poised beyond compare, like an immortal on the brink of soaring to the heavens. Shiwu watched, overcome with wonder. The abbot had taught them martial arts, but the man's abilities were only average. It was hard for him to describe what truly profound martial arts looked like. He'd heard the abbot explain that a true master of martial arts could move their very surroundings, influence every blade of grass beneath heaven, and could even affect them with only their mind. Chuyi and Shiwu were completely captivated by his sword and longed to see such things themselves. If only I could witness that kind of master one day, they'd thought. And now, the scene he dreamed of was playing out right before his eyes. Shiwu had only just started on the path to martial arts. He wasn't even in sight of the gateway to them. But even he, as he watched Shen Xiao's each and every move, could feel the sheer power-moving nature itself. It was a picture beyond what his limited vocabulary could describe, but it was also a sight he'd never forget for his entire life. Shifu, Chuyi, did you see it? Hot tears brimmed in Shiwu's eyes. He felt the impulse to kneel and bawl his heart out. Even as Shiwu watched from off to the side, the one standing in the center, Shen Xiao, had entered into something indescribably profound. He could feel his sword qi and the river waters invisibly influencing each other, each driving the other on. His sword intent flowed through his entire body before gushing forth from Shanhe Tongbei in his hand. His heart followed his thoughts, and his sword followed his heart. The fully formed sword intent transformed into an arc of white light, piercing straight through the dense haze of vapor. Whenever the sword intent fell, the river waters exploded with a thunderous roar. Water droplets sprayed out, sparkling with the colors of the rainbow. It was a magnificent sight. The point of Shen Xiao's sword quivered. Abruptly and without warning, he sprang from the rock. Though he'd been enthralled just a moment ago, Shiwu yelled at the sight and ran to the riverbank. But as Shen Chao swiftly descended into the turbulent waters, his sword didn't stop. It moved unceasingly, free and unrestrained, as if he were only strolling through a courtyard, plucking flowers with his sword. The Yellow River, which had never stopped for anyone, which hungered to devour everything in its path, kept galloping onward beneath Shen Chao. But in the 1 meter radius around him, it became as gentle as the moonlight's touch upon a breeze, leaving all unstirred, letting everything come and go. Spring comes not from heaven, but from my hands. The rushing waters are heartless, while my sword is warm-hearted. With my warm-hearted sword, I gallop through the heartless waters. Alone, I brace the 1,000 storms, continuing ever onward. Where my sword glare falls, I obtain the essence of all beauty. Having completed the entire set, Shen Chao leapt from the rock in the river back onto the bank. He looked behind him, squinting. His vision was still rather lacking. Perhaps the lingering poison had stayed too long, too deep within his body, for even as he rebuilt his foundations, his eyes never regained the clarity they'd once had. But this didn't hinder him. During his demonstration of swordplay, he'd used his innate awareness of the world around him, utilizing his sword intent to maintain a connection with his surroundings. Hence, his steps had been absolutely precise, unaffected by his poor eyesight. He lost some, gained some. It was a blessing in disguise. Next to him, Shi Wu asked timidly, "Shen Shi, is it really possible for me to reach your level one day?" Shen Chao stroked the boy's head and smiled. "Of course you can. Many thousand paths spring from the great Tao. Everyone walks their own. As long as you study diligently, success will naturally follow." Shi Wu couldn't help but smile. It was the first time he'd smiled since leaving Bailong Monastery. Shen Chao squatted so that their gazes were level. "I know you haven't forgotten your Shifu's death. I haven't forgotten either. We'll keep him in our hearts together. But your Shifu's spirit in heaven surely wants you to live happily. Promise me, once we pass the Yellow River, let us throw away our sorrows and continue forward in joy, all right?" At the mention of his Shifu, Shi Wu's eyes grew moist once more, but he quickly nodded in his head. "All right. I'll live on and live well. I'll train hard and become a good person. That way, I won't disappoint Shifu, and I won't disappoint you." Shen Chao didn't speak, just held him tightly for a long time. Finally, he released the boy and took his hand. 2 figures, one large and one small, walked slowly along the Yellow River, moving ever forward. As for the Yellow River, it continued to roar onward, never changing. Their pace wasn't fast. The journey took them a fair number of months. It was already early August when they arrived at the foot of Mount Tai. Mount Tai had many peaks, both large and small, totaling over 100. Bixia Sect wasn't located on Dai Summit, where many generations of kings and emperors had performed their imperial ceremonies of mountain worship, but on a rather unknown peak around the northwest side called Junan Peak. Junan Peak wasn't particularly tall, but its environment was auspicious and blessed by nature. Jagged rocks circled its summit, and clear streams murmured atop it. Due to its treacherous landscape, few travelers or woodcutters visited. The 2 of them took a short break at the foot of the mountain to rest and prepare, then began their climb. The closer they got to their destination, the more nervous Shi Wu became. He grew fidgety and restless. As Shen Chao led him up the mountain, he blurted out, "Shen Shi, do you know what kind of sect Bixia Sect is?" Shen Chao smiled and answered. Bixia Sect was founded during the Han Dynasty. These days, it's led by Zhao Chiying. Zhu Xiong said that sect leader Zhao is his Shizhi, so in terms of seniority, you should be in the same generation. Shi Wu clutched a corner of Shen Chao's robe, but not because he was afraid of falling. He'd been studying martial arts and swordplay under Shen Chao for the past few months and made great progress. He'd already internalized nearly half of Shendu Mountain's Qinggong. A rainbow stretches across the heavens. "Once you bring me to Bixia Sect, will your esteemed self leave?" "Do you not wish for me to leave?" Shen Chao asked, deliberately teasing him. Shi Wu was a little embarrassed. He gave a closed-mouthed smile and didn't answer. Ever since the abbot in Chuyi passed away, Shen Chao had been taking attentive care of Shi Wu, both as a master and as a father. Shi Wu had long grown to see him as his own family. and he admired and adored Shanqiao deeply. Now that Bixia sect was right in front of them, his Shifu's dying wish would soon be fulfilled. But it came with the prospect of separation, so he couldn't feel happy at all. "Don't worry," said Shanqiao. "I won't leave as soon as we arrive. We'll check things out first." What he hadn't told Shiwu was this. Although Bixia sect had once been a very large and powerful sect, they'd fallen into great decline over the recent years. Only the appearance of Zhao Chiying had boosted their reputation. Zhao Chiying was the kind of legendary talent who appeared once every 100 years. But a single person wasn't enough for a sect to flourish. No matter how strong Zhao Chiying was, reversing such a raging tide proved difficult. Rumor had it that this sect leader had been in secluded cultivation for the past few years, so all sect affairs fell to a shixiong named Yue Kunchi. There must have been a reason Zhu Lengquan had left the sect, and it couldn't be a happy one. Shanqiao didn't know how they'd react to Shiwu. If they disliked the boy, there was no way he would leave Shiwu there to suffer. Shiwu didn't know that Shanqiao was so preoccupied with thinking about Shiwu himself. The boy was nervous and uneasy, first worried that he wouldn't get along with the people of Bixia sect, then also worried that he'd have to separate with Shanqiao so very soon. They'd ascended nearly halfway up the mountain in this way when Shanqiao sensed something strange. Many sects located on mountain summits had strict safeguards, with disciples stationed around the mountain's foot, watching. Even the sects with laxer defenses would still have someone posted about halfway up. But they were already almost to the sect itself and still hadn't seen even a trace of a person. That certainly wasn't normal. Shiwu had also realized something was wrong. The hand clutching Shanqiao's robe loosened a little. If something happened, he didn't want to become the millstone dragging Shanqiao down. "Look, Shanshi!" Shanqiao couldn't see well, but Shiwu had discovered a broken sword left in the brush along the stone path. He bent and picked it up, then handed it to Shanqiao. Shanqiao felt along the break in the sword. It'd been snapped through excessive force. There didn't seem to be any dead bodies around, so it was hard to say whether its master had fallen from the cliff or run away. "Be careful," said Shanqiao. "There might be more near the top. Stay behind me." Sure enough, the higher they climbed, the more weapons they found. Soon, corpses began to appear, one after another. Whether they were Bixia sect disciples or not was unclear. Just then, a distant shout came from behind them. "Who goes there? Halt!" Before they'd finished speaking, they swung a sword at Shiwu's back. Shanqiao heard the voice. His expression unchanged, he grabbed Shiwu and turned, swapping their positions in the blink of an eye. Then he himself went to welcome the blade. He didn't draw Shanhe Tongbei, but sent a palm strike to knock the blade aside and off course. With a flap and a furl of his sleeve, he caught the attacker's wrist. "Taoist Master Shen?" said the astonished attacker. "Who is this distinguished master?" Shanqiao squinted but could only make out a person's silhouette before him, their features unclear. "This one is Fan Yuanbai, a disciple of Bixia sect. We've met once before in the Su residence," they said. Shanqiao thought for a moment, and a faint impression came to him. Back when he'd attended Madame Qin's birthday banquet in place of Yan Wushi, he had indeed met a disciple from Bixia sect. "May this one ask why Taoist Master Shen is here?" asked Fan Yuanbai. There was obvious disquiet in his voice, but he endured it to politely ask after Shanqiao. Partly because Fan Yuanbai was mild-tempered by nature, partly because he was one of many who'd been impressed with Shanqiao's duel against Duen Wenyang. Shanqiao briefly explained the connection between Shiwu and Bixia sect. He even had Shiwu show him the wooden plaque as proof. Fan Yuanbai accepted the wooden plaque and examined it for a moment. "Indeed, I've heard of Zhu Shishuzhu, though when it comes to what happened, I know little of the details. Given that, would the two of you mind coming with me up the mountain? This way, I can report the matter to my master and elders." "Thank you, Fan Langjun," said Shanqiao. "I just now saw many broken swords and bodies along the way. Surely you know what's happening atop the mountain?" Fan Yuanbai smiled bitterly. "It's quite the coincidence. For the past 6 months, I was home visiting my family, and I've only returned to the sect today. The moment I arrived at the foot of the mountain, I realized something was wrong. The disciples on duty there were nowhere to be seen. I ran up the mountain, stricken by panic and alarm. Then happened to encounter the two of you. I thought he'd thought them to be enemies, not allies. If that's the case, says Shenqiao, let's not waste any more time here. We'll hurry up to see what happened. If nothing's wrong, that would at least put our hearts at ease. Fan Yuanbei quickly concurred and joined Shenqiao and Shi Wu in their journey up the mountain. But the higher they climbed, the more on edge they became, as if their hearts were suspended above an abyss. For as they went farther, all they saw were more and more swords and corpses. Fan Yuanbai held fast to his composure at first. He even bent to examine the bodies and check if anyone was still alive. But by the end of their journey, his face and lips were bloodless and pale, and he was unable to utter a single word. With Fan Yuanbai, Shenqiao and Shi Wu learned that there were Bixia Sect disciples among the dead, the majority of them, in fact. It wasn't clear who the other corpses were, but on their weapons, they'd also used swords, were carved the characters Dongzhou. Perplexed, Shi Wu asked, "What kind of sect is Dongzhou?" As a newcomer to the Jianghu, he assumed his ignorance was due to his limited understanding, but unexpectedly, Fan Yuanbai only frowned, unspeaking. Instead, Shenqiao answered, "There's no Dongzhou sect in the Central Plains, but there is one in Goguryeo." Only then did Fan Yuanbai say, "That's right, they claim to be the largest sect in Goguryeo. I've heard of them too, but Goguryeo is a foreign country. They've never had anything to do with Bixia Sect. Why would they show up here?" The conversation didn't slow them down. The mountain summit loomed closer and closer, and they could already hear the clash of blades drifting across the distance. Shenqiao even caught the sound of people yelling and cursing. Fan Yuanbai put on some speed, running up ahead with his sword already drawn. Shi Wu tugged at Shenqiao. "Shenshi," he whispered, "you can follow behind me. There are a lot of dead bodies on the ground." Warmth flooded Shenqiao's heart, and he nodded, accepting the boy's kind gesture. All right. He'd mentally braced himself, but what Fan Yuanbai saw still sent agony spearing through his heart. His sect, once so calm and peaceful, had been transformed into a sea of blood. Inside the sect gates were scores more corpses, their blood pooling into narrow streams that slowly trickled away and out of sight. For Shi Wu, who hadn't yet joined Bixia Sect, the deaths of the sect's disciples were not personal. With Shenqiao at his side, he could still keep a calm and composed face. But for Fan Yuanbai, it was almost too much. These were the martial siblings with whom he'd spent each day from dawn to dusk, who were as close to him as his real family. Some of them had even teased him before he'd left, fussing that they wanted him to bring them back some treats and toys. Yet, now they could only lie on the icy ground, never to speak again. Fan Yuanbai's eyes were red, his grief and hatred slowly mounting. When he saw two groups of people battling each other in the distance, he gripped his sword and charged forward without the slightest hesitation. But just as he was about to enter the fray, he froze. Both factions of fighters were dressed in the clothes of Bixia Sect disciples, and he saw familiar faces on both sides. "Li Shidi, Qiao Shidi, stop! What's going on?" But everyone was in the thick of battle, completely absorbed in the fight. No one paid him any attention as the clash of weapons rang out endlessly, dazzling light glinting off their blades. Fan Yuanbai couldn't understand what was happening. Why, after a single trip away from the mountain, he'd returned to this scene of his sect slaughtering one another. The tumult in his heart left him distracted, and so he failed to notice the sword that thrust toward his back. But before the ambusher could drive his sword into Fan Yuanbai, he screamed and dropped his weapon, then fell to the ground, howling and squirming, clutching his wrist. "Watch out behind you." Shenqiao's voice came from behind, even and composed. Fan Yuanbai's senses returned a little, and he turned to thank him. Then he yanked up his attacker, only to realize that it was another Bixia Sect disciple. "Elder Liu's disciple, Xueqi? Why did you attack me?" Xueqiao looked at Shenqiao, who just cut the tendons of his wrist with a single blow. He turned fearful and said, The real sect leader returned, but your Shifu Elder Ye refuses to step down from his position as acting sect leader. He ordered his disciples to war with us. The more Fan Yuanbai heard, the more confused he became. Finally, he had to cut in. Nonsense! His whole life, my Shifu devoted his heart and soul to the common good. Why would he refuse to step down or whatever? I don't know. I don't know, yelled Xueqi. I was acting under orders. Don't kill me. Shunqiao put his hand on Fan Yuanbai's shoulder, telling him to calm down. We're still in the sect's outermost area. Let's head to the inner area and see. Then he asked Xueqi, where's your Shifu? He spoke softly, but his voice sounded crisply in Xueqi's ears. A shudder ran through him. In the inner area, he's fighting Elder Ye. Fan Yuanbai ran out of patience for listening. He leapt forward, grabbing his sword and charging into the inner area. As he ran, a crowd of armed fighters came to stop him. Some were from his sect, some were from Dongzhou sect, and there were also some dressed in black who had heavy brows and prominent noses. After a few exchanges of blows, Fan Yuanbai's strength started to flag, and his movements grew clumsier. He was almost hit with a slash, but fortunately, Shunqiao had followed close behind, keeping an eye on him. Green as he was, Shiwu was handling the situation with much more ease than Fan Yuanbai. The sword he was using was just an ordinary long sword he'd picked up on the way up the mountain, but with his every move, he brought to bear all of Shunqiao's recent teachings. He felt none of Yuanbai's turmoil, and with Shunqiao beside him, his mind was clearer, his movements steadier. In fact, he was taking the charging attackers as nothing more than sparring opponents. But Shiwu was still only a novice, after all. He started out a little clumsy and flustered. When, after great effort, he finally subdued an enemy, he rushed to turn his head, seeking an approving smile from the person behind him. Shen Shidi, how did I do? And Shunqiao really did smile. Very well, he said, but you must be careful. He brushed his hand gently over the boy's shoulder, leaving behind a blooming trace of warmth. Greatly encouraged, Shiwu said, yes. In the inner area, Yue Kuncher's sword flew from his hand when Yuan Hailo slammed a palm into his waist, forcing Yue Kuncher to stumble 3 steps back and crash into a pillar. He paid no heed to the nearby disciples who rushed to help him, nor did he look at Yuan Hailo. Instead, he roared at Sect Elder Lu Feng. Lu Feng, how dare you collude with outsiders to assault Bixia Sect? You traitorous, evil bastard! You don't deserve to be a disciple of Bixia Sect. Lu Feng scowled. You don't get to decide what I deserve or don't, Yue Kuncher. That's for sect leader Zhao to tell us. Yue Kuncher grit his teeth. Lu Feng's faction obviously knew that Zhao Shimei was in secluded cultivation and couldn't tolerate even the slightest disturbance. They'd timed their attack to coincide with her seclusion. When you were young, your Shifu's scolding often had you in tears, said Yuan Hailo. I was the one who ran down the mountain to buy you sweets. When your Shifu called you a fool, I was the one who took you by the hand and taught you all those moves. I trust you've forgotten all about that? I didn't forget, said Yue Kuncher. I'll remember the kindness Yuan Shishu showed me for the rest of my life. But now you're a member of Dongzhou Sect. You even married a Goguryeo princess. You brought these Dongzhou Sect disciples here and slaughtered your way into Bixia Sect. And you colluded with the Gok Turks and our sect elders, intent on the leader's seat. Is this how you treat your own sect? Yuan Hailo sneered. If your Shifu hadn't stabbed me in the back, subjected me to public castigation, exiled me from my own sect, and forced me to flee in despair, then I never would have ended up in Goguryeo. Of course, you wouldn't care how much I suffered before I caught the Dongzhou sect leader's eye. I became his personal disciple, and 20 years passed in a blink. It's unfortunate your Shifu has already passed on. I'd have been more than happy to seek justice from him. Pu Anmi, who'd been watching from the sidelines for a while, broke in. Say, why are you telling him so much? Rengong and Lugong? Zhao Chiying is stuck in seclusion, so Yue Kuncher holds sway as acting sect leader. I can only imagine how pleased he is about that. Of course, he isn't willing to step down. We've already killed all these people, so let's just finish the job and do away with anyone who won't listen to us. Once Zhao Chiying's the only one left, she won't be able to stop us, even when she does leave seclusion. He's right, said Lu Feng flatly. Yue Kunchu's strength is almost spent, Yuan Shishong. He's just talking nonsense to buy time. Let's dispose him first. Hui Lushan owes you quite a bit, and now it's his disciple's turn for payback. Yuan Hailo spoke no more. He lunged forward and struck at Yue Kunchu. His strength completely exhausted, Yue Kunchu had nowhere to retreat. He could only close his eyes and wait for death. His disciple, Zhou Yexue, leapt from his side, trying to block the blow for her master. Fan Yuanbai stumbled onto the scene in time to see this play out. Seized by terror and panic, he screamed, "Shimei!" The distance between them was too far. Even if he flung himself over, it was impossible to reach her in time. Just at that moment, a shining sword glare swept past his ear and pierced right between Yuan Hailo and Zhou Yexue. It happened too fast for anyone to react. Yuan Hailo was already halfway through his strike. The sight filled him with alarm, but it was too late to withdraw. With all the majesty of a king descending from heaven, the sword glare screamed forth and quelled his palm blast. Pain seared through his palm, and he quickly retreated. He landed on the ground and looked down to see a long, bloody gash gored deep into his palm. Nearly all of Bixia Sect disciples who were present had been either killed or injured during the battle in the inner area, and the remainder were all worn down and listless, unable to collect themselves. And so, no one had realized Shen Qiao's strike had come with a fully formed sword intent. In fact, it approached the echelon of sword heart. The likes of Yuan Hailo had been able to tell, but he'd never lift his enemy's spirits by saying so. "Who are you?" Yuan Hailo snarled as he held the weeping gash on his hand. "Shen Qiao." He returned his sword to its sheath, his voice quiet and gentle, but it sounded clearly in everyone's ears. Most people didn't show any particular response, but Pu Anmi's expression filled with horror, as if he'd seen a ghost. "You're Shen Qiao?" "It seems this young master recognizes me. May I ask for your esteemed name?" Pu Anmi silently repeated to himself that it was impossible. Then he pulled himself together and offered a smile. "My master is Kunye. I trust that Taoist Master Shan is familiar with him?" Shen Qiao had excellent self-control. He showed little reaction to the name of the opponent who'd thrown him off a cliff and left him grievously injured. With a slight nod, he said, "An old friend indeed." Having brought up his Shifu's name, Pu Anmi's confidence returned. "Ever since the battle on Banbu Peak, my master has missed Taoist Master Shan dearly. He even worried that you might have died from the fall. Fortunately, Taoist Master Shan overcame disaster through the blessings of heaven. My master isn't far from here. I trust that he'll be on the mountain by tomorrow. Then there can be a reunion between old friends, and Taoist Master Shan can catch up with my master properly." At the name of Banbu Peak, most people there realized who Shen Qiao was. All Shiwu knew was that some of the gazes directed at Shen Qiao angered him greatly. He couldn't help but frown to himself, stepping forward a little to block those eyes. Shen Qiao seemed to sense Shiwu's thoughts. He smiled a little and placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice still gentle and mild. "Indeed, there should be proper reunion between old friends." He then changed the topic. "I trust you're not all here because of me, so I must ask you to resolve the matter at hand first." "Even in Goguryeo, I heard of Taoist Master Shan," Yuan Hailo said coldly. "It's truly a pleasure to meet you today. However, these are Bixia Sect's internal affairs, and Taoist Master Shan has no reason to interfere. May I ask why you're here?" If it were anyone else, Yuan Hailo would have made the first attack in a bid for the upper hand long ago. But Shen Qiao's move had thoroughly shaken the audience, and it made him wary. Shen Qiao sighed. "I have no intention of interfering with Bixia Sect's internal matters. However, I came here today to return a junior to his sect and forefathers. Surely I cannot simply stand by and watch you massacre the entire sect." Yue Kunchu was confused. "Taoist Master Shan, who is this junior you speak of?" Shen Qiao briefly explained Shiwu's background. Yue Kunchu gasped and blurted out, "He's Zhu Shishu's disciple?" From the sidelines, Yuan Hailo burst out laughing. "Good, very good. Seems like today's a good day. All our old friends have gathered here. Zhu Lengquan didn't come himself, but he sent us his disciple. If he were still here, I'd ask him to say a couple of words for the sake of justice. Tell us which is the truth. Was Hui Lushan devoid of compassion and righteousness? Or did I really deserve to be expelled from the sect? Jie Kunchi slowly exhaled a lungful of stagnant air. Zhen Shishu, this will be the last time I call you Shishu. Before my master passed away, he too mentioned what happened between you, and I could hear the awful regret in his voice. He must have thought that he'd made many mistakes back then too. He even told me that if I were to ever see you again, I must respectfully greet you as Shishu, just the same as before. But those were the past generation's grudges. Even if you care little for your fellow sect members, you should remember the great favor the sect did in raising you. But today, you even... He looked at the corpses strewn across the ground, at the sheer desolation all around him. He found it difficult to continue, and his voice dropped low with anguish. What wrong have the disciples of Bixia sect committed? They didn't see that happen. They weren't involved. So why did they have to die? Lu Feng, you were an elder, yet you colluded with outsiders. Irritated, Lu Feng cut him off. Enough! I've always hated the way you kick up a fuss. If Zhao Chiying were willing to give a little more attention to sect administration, Bixia sect wouldn't have fallen to the deplorable state we're in now. Those people died because they were incompetent. So what if they're dead? If you're sensible, you'll hand over the leadership right now. No matter who takes over Bixia sect in the future, we'd be in better hands than yours. And what if I refuse? Said Jie Kunchi. Pu Anmi laughed. Zhou is about to invade Qi, ready to charge in like the unstoppable tide. Qi's strength has long faded. Sect leader Zhen and Elder Lu have already pledged their loyalty to Ishbara Kagan of the Eastern Goktur Khaganate, and they were both granted government posts and noble titles. If Elder Yue is willing to see things clearly and lead Bixia sect in paying allegiance to the Khaganate too, then there's a bright future ahead for you. After that, he seemed to recall something. He turned to Shen Qiao. I almost forgot to tell Taoist Master Shen, but it's about your Shirdi, the current Xuandu Mountain sect leader Yu. Not long ago, Ishbara Kagan conferred upon him the title of Yuyang's Bishop of Great Peace and Perfected Master. Truly worthy of celebration. If you hadn't lost to my master that day, you'd be the one with that title, no? Chapter 49, The Incident at Bixia Sect. Shen Qiao wrinkled his brows, though not because he lacked a title. Does that mean that Yu Ai is coming with Kunye to Bixia sect? Pu Anmi laughed. Perfected Master Yu isn't coming, only my Shurtsun. If Taoist Master Shen is interested, once my Shurtsun is here, we can go see Ishbara Kagan together. I'm certain the Kagan will be very happy to meet you. This humble Taoist has indeed fallen on hard times, but I haven't fallen so far that I need to depend on a pillaging, slaughtering bandit. Pu Anmi's smile faded instantly. Do you know what you're saying? You think you can look down on whoever you want just because Yan Wushi is supporting you? I've never thought that way, Shen Qiao said coolly. Suddenly, another smile spread across Pu Anmi's face. You should know, soon Yan Wushi won't even be able to save himself. You'd be better off pledging allegiance to our powerful and prosperous Khaganate. I can see that Taoist Master Shen has already regained most of his martial arts. Ishbara Kagan has a great love of talent, and if you serve under him, he's sure to grant you a glorious position. Then you could stand on equal footing with your Shurdi and compete with him as a proper rival. Thank you for your kindness, said Shen Qiao, but I must decline. Anger flared in Pu Anmi as Shen Qiao's refusal to bend to neither threat nor reward. Just as he was about to try again, Lu Feng, who'd been driven to impatient irritation on the sidelines, spoke up. Pu Langjun, can't you leave your grudges for another day? Let's deal with Bixia sect's situation first, lest our delays cause even more problems. Pu Anmi nodded and looked to Zhen Hailo. I will follow sect leader Zhen's opinion on this matter. What does sect leader Zhen think? Zhen Hailo was now a member of Dongzhou sect. His official rank there was quite high, and he'd married the daughter of the king of Goguryeo, making him rather well-placed. The Eastern Khaganate wanted to take advantage of Zhou's invasion of Qi to seize a good chunk of Qi's land in the east. This was in perfect harmony with Goguryeo's interests, so the two countries had already discussed how to divide up the territory. As Zhou invaded from the west with all its military might and Qi rushed to quell the flames, Goguryeo and the Khaganate could effortlessly claim Qi's land in the east. As for the matter of the Bixia sect, it was only a small, unremarkable piece of all these schemes. It had nothing to do with the greater picture. Zhen Hailo, now son-in-law of the king of Goguryeo, had pledged allegiance to the Khaganate, and so the Khaganate needed to show him respect. Hence, when he went to Bixia sect to settle old grudges, they followed and lent him their support. "I'll give you one last chance," Zhen Hailo said to Jie Kunshi. "Surrender now, and I'll spare your life." Jie Kunshi panted, clutching his chest. "Bixia sect's legacy has been passed down through generation after generation. Our sect may not be famous, but within us lies our forefathers' blood and soul. As one of Bixia sect's disciples, I cannot bring shame upon them. I would rather die than surrender." Zhen Hailo burst into loud laughter. "Excellent! Hui Lishan was a treacherous, petty scoundrel, but he accepted a disciple with a spine of iron. I shall grant your wish." He was still apprehensive about Shen Chao's earlier intervention, though. He glanced to the side, about to say something. Pu Anmi seemed to understand his concerns. In the next moment, he inserted himself between Shen Chao and Yue Kunshi. "Let me see just how much of Taoist Master Shen's martial arts have returned." Kunye was highly honored and well respected. He was Hulugu's personal disciple and also the Khaganate's wise king of the left. Pu Anmi was Kunye's first disciple and also came from a noble family in the Khaganate. He'd always thought highly of himself, though he'd seen Shen Chao's sword qi just now. He didn't take it too seriously. After all, everyone knew how gravely Shen Chao had been injured, and there was no cure for joyful reunion. When they'd spoken, he'd noticed the haziness in Shen Chao's eyes, evidence of his ailing vision. He'd drawn his conclusions. He immediately struck out with a harsh killing blow. By attacking first, he hoped to seize the initiative and eliminate this new variable, this Shen Chao. Pu Anmi's weapon was a saber. His saber techniques were incredibly imperious, like a lone wolf upon a grassy plain. One lash of his saber could strike fear into anyone's heart. All who heard it shuddered and longed to flee. His saber slashed down, its vast might closing in from above like a mountain, leaving those beneath it gasping for breath. His strike was swift as lightning, but by the time it fell, Shen Chao was gone. He'd already moved 3 steps back, avoiding the murderous blade. But his retreat didn't fill Pu Anmi with pride because Shen Chao hadn't drawn his sword. What did it mean to not draw one's sword? It meant that Shen Chao didn't find the situation urgent enough to draw his weapon. It also meant he thought he didn't need a sword to deal with someone like Pu Anmi. Pu Anmi's expression twisted, and he seethed with humiliation. This Shen Chao, he thought, was far too arrogant. "Once you lost to my master, but now you look down on me? What gives you the right to look down on me?" His first blow had missed, so a second one had to follow. While his thoughts turned, Pu Anmi leapt forward and the glare from his saber surged. It didn't scream from above like his previous attack. This time, it came on like towering waves that swelled inward. Though it looked like only one attack, he'd actually fired 6 blasts of chi from his saber, each more powerful than the last. A saber master his age would have to be extraordinarily talented to be capable of creating 4 or 5 bursts of chi, yet Pu Anmi had fired 6. One could scarcely blame him for being so confident and self-assured. Shen Chao finally drew his sword. Shanhe Tongbei hummed as it emerged from its sheath. Perhaps it was resonating with the saber chi, or perhaps the constant nourishment of sword chi from Shen Chao had given the blade a soul of its own, and now it was raring to greet the enemy. Shiwu's eyes went round in surprise. He recognized this as one of the moves Shen Chao had used during his demonstration of the Azure Wave sword technique back on the bank of the Yellow River. The cool breeze gently blows. The bright moon dips behind the pines. A wind rises unbidden in the forest. A man sits beneath a pine, his back straight as the trunk itself. He plucks the guqin, and from this careless motion, a cool breeze is born, wafting gently against his face, carrying petals that drift like rain. The move struck with such speed, yet it had such a poetic, picturesque name. Shiwu didn't understand at first, but when he saw Shan Chao's effortless manner, he realized something. This one sword strike blew away all 6 blasts of saber chi. Pu Anmi couldn't believe his eyes. For a brief moment, he froze, but then Shan Chao's sword was right before his eyes, aiming straight at his face. Pu Anmi's only option was to withdraw his saber and retreat. Shan Chao pressed close in pursuit, an uncharacteristic tactic for him. As one advanced and the other retreated, they traversed Bixia Sect's inner area in an instant. Right as his back was about to slam into the wall, Pu Anmi used his momentum to leap onto one of the ceiling rafters, then swung from it upside down and slashed at Shan Chao with his saber once more. Some distance away, Yue Kunchi was being completely outmatched by Ren Hailo. Not only was Ren Hailo a generation higher than him in seniority, but Yue Kunchi's martial abilities were barely above average. He'd only been entrusted with managing sect affairs because Zhao Chiying was in seclusion. With his days bursting with myriad duties, he neglected his training more and more. Of course, he was weaker than Ren Hailo. In only a moment, he fell to the ground and coughed up blood, injured. This time, Ren Hailo had no intention of leaving him any room to escape. He lifted his palm, readying a killing blow. The only 2 people on the same scene still capable of fighting were Fan Yuanbai and Zhou Yexue, but they were occupied with Lu Feng. The remainder were only mediocre practitioners, incapable of coming to Yue Kunchi's aid, so Shiwu braced himself and charged over to block the blow for Yue Kunchi. Of course, Ren Hailo didn't take the little boy seriously at all. With a cold laugh and a swing of his sleeve, he tossed Shiwu aside. Shiwu yelped and fell backward. His sword clattered from his hand to the ground. Shan Chao heard the commotion. Even without turning his head, he knew what had happened. With a silent, disappointing sigh, he lamented that a grand sect like Bixia had fallen to such a state. He swept aside Pu Anmi's saber while turning back to save Yue Kunchi. With the burst of his sword chi, he dispersed Ren Hailo's palm blast. In a moment, it became Shan Chao against both Pu Anmi and Ren Hailo. 1 versus 2. Pu Anmi gave a mocking laugh. Taoist Master Shen is truly too capable. Everything is up to you. Ever since Pu Anmi had seen that he couldn't use Shan Chao, he'd decided to kill him. Now that Ren Hailo had joined him, he was under much less pressure, and he no longer hesitated. Every slash of his saber was swung to kill. 8 blasts of chi surged from his saber towards Shan Chao, powerful enough to overturn the mountains and oceans alike. The bystanders only saw how Shan Chao now had to handle both the impenetrable chi of Pu Anmi's saber as well as Ren Hailo's fierce and billowing palm blasts. Outnumbered like this, no matter how powerful of a martial artist Shan Chao was, it was likely to spread him completely thin. It'd be hard to keep up. Shiwu's heart had leapt into his throat. He didn't dare make a sound, terrified of distracting Shan Chao and disturbing his ability to judge by ear. His fists were tightly clenched, and he soaked in sweat without his notice. Shan Chao struck with his sword. The force of his slash was enough to sweep away everything before it. Where his blade fell, sword chi exploded outward, snow white as it tore through the sky. After this strike, he immediately retreated. With a tap of his toes, he soared through the air. This was Xuandu Mountains, a rainbow stretches across the heavens, executed to the utmost. A split second later, he vanished from everyone's sight, and when he appeared again, it was behind Ren Hailo. Pu Anmi's saber fell to the ground, a long, bloody gash now scored into his wrist. Yet he didn't even glance at the wound, his expression still full of disbelief, as if in utter denial that he'd lost. Ren Hailo was a little better off in comparison. He withdrew his palm quickly enough, and instead of wasting more time on Shan Chao, he turned back to killing Yue Kunchi. But Shan Chao intervened again. Resentful anger filled Ren Hailo's heart, but all he could do was go on fighting Shan Chao, fury written all over his face. Do you know just how shameless and despicable Yue Kunchi Shifu was? By helping him now, you're only helping the wicked, refusing to tell black from white. I don't know the details of the quarrel between you, and I have no right to intervene, Shan Chao said severely. But do you really believe that the Bixia Sect disciples whose corpses litter the ground should pay the price for your grudge? Everyone in Bixia Sect owes me, snarled Ren Hailo. I endured everything in silence for more than 10 years. Huai Lashan is already dead. So what's wrong with making his successors pay in his place? Shen Chao spoke no more. If someone's heart was steeped in hatred, no amount of explanation or advice they were offered would get through. Furthermore, Ren Hailo had allied himself with the Khaganate and slaughtered almost everyone in Bixia Sect. It was obvious he had no desire to end things peacefully. They exchanged blows, moving faster and faster. Although Ren Hailo wasn't well known in the martial arts circle of the Central Plains, he wasn't someone easily dealt with. In his youth, he'd been the most talented disciple in Bixia Sect. Afterward, he left the sect for some reason and went to Goguryeo, then reestablished himself in Dongzhou Sect, rising to become one of their elders. He'd ascended to the ranks of first-rate martial experts. Though Shen Chao's foundations had been rebuilt, it was impossible to return to his old level overnight. He only had a little over half the strength he'd held at his peak. But without the lingering poison and his old injuries, his movements became more deft and relaxed than ever, no longer tinged with the fear of future consequences. The fight between the two blazed like fire on old tinder, leaving Shen Chao with no attention left for anything else. Seeing this, Pu Anmi's thoughts took a sudden turn. After briefly assessing this battle situation with narrowed eyes, he waited until Shen Chao turned to deal with Ruyan Hailo's palm strike, then suddenly drew his saber and slashed at Shen Chao's back. "Shen Shi! Careful, Taoist Master Shen!" There came a chorus of shouts. Yue Kunshi and Shi Wu's were among them. They'd been closely watching the battle, so naturally they both saw Pu Anmi strike. Unfortunately, one of them was gravely injured, and the other lacked the skill to help. Shi Wu even leapt up and ran over, but he was only a novice martial artist. How could he block Pu Anmi's attack? The saber was already mere inches from Shen Chao's back. A cool gust of wind blew in from whereabouts unknown, carrying a faint fragrance with it. Before Shi Wu realized what was going on, he blinked and saw what looked like a bright blue slash floating by before his eyes. Pu Anmi's saber didn't connect with Shen Chao. Instead, it landed in a fair and slender hand. It looked like the newcomer had caught the blade barehanded, but there was actually a thin layer of true qi between hand and blade. A palm struck Pu Anmi's body, sending him careening backward. The tiles beneath his feet splintered with his stumbling steps, the shards flying everywhere. He fell back and back until he reached the entranceway. "Zhao Chiying?" Pu Anmi guessed the newcomer's identity straight away. "Yes," the woman in blue said. She quickly lunged forward, pressing toward Pu Anmi with every step. A short moment later, she'd snatched away Pu Anmi's saber and sealed his acupoints. Zhao Chiying took a few more steps forward and helped Yue Kunshi off the ground. "Is Shixiong all right?" she asked in concern. Yue Kunshi smiled bitterly. "I'm fine, but I was useless, and now all your work is for naught." Zhao Chiying shook her head, but said no more. When she saw that Shen Chao had a slight upper hand over Ren Hailo, she stayed out of their fight, opting instead to bring Fan Yuanbai and Lu Feng's battle to a close first. Lu Feng and Ren Hailo had been in secret communication for quite a while. Lu Feng's help was one of the main reasons Ren Hailo's assault on Bixia Sect had gone so smoothly. He'd been in Bixia Sect for many years and had built up a group of loyal disciples. But after more than half a day of vicious fighting, he'd also suffered great losses. Now there were only a few people left battling Fan Yuanbai and the rest. Even so, with the support of Dongzhou Sect and Pu Anmi, Lu Feng had been almost certain he could seize the position of Bixia Sect's leader today as long as nothing went wrong. Who could have foreseen that Zhao Chiying would emerge at this moment, when she should have been at a critical junction in her secluded cultivation? Fan Yuanbai and Zhou Yexue were covered in wounds. They were hanging on by a thread, their strength long spent. But sure enough, Zhao Chiying's appearance gave them tremendous encouragement, and Lu Feng was furious. Without thinking, he turned his sword on Zhao Chiying, the glare of his sword blazing fierce as it roared toward her, wrapping in savage sword chi. Zhao Chiying held both hands in front of her, drawing taijitsu with her fingertips. Her long, slender fingers curved into a profusion of shapes, each arrestingly lovely. Lu Feng's expression transformed into alarm, for his long sword was unable to advance even another inch. Under Zhao Chiying's manipulation, the sword exploded into countless fragments. "Ah!" With a wretched scream, he was sent flying backward. He crashed into the wall behind him, and the major acupoints all over his body were promptly sealed. At the other end of the inner grounds, Shenqiao had also defeated his opponent. With the tendons of his sword hand cut, Ren Hailo knelt on the ground, his face as pale as ash, Shenqiao's sword pressed against his neck. It was over. With Lu Feng, Ren Hailo, and Pu Anmi all defeated and under control, there was little to fear from the rest of the enemies. Bixia Sect's remaining disciples had found their backbone. They quickly stabilized the situation and rounded up all the members of Dongzhou Sect. However, when they looked at the scene before them, the sect's disciples littering the ground, their blood flowing in small rivers, none could dredge up the joy of victory. There was only a sense of heaviness and exhaustion. Zhao Chiying looked to Lu Feng. Elder Lu, I know you and Ren Hailo used to get along very well, but was that all it took for you to be so cruel? To throw away our disciples' lives, collude with outsiders, and destroy Bixia Sect like it was nothing? Lu Feng sneered. For many years, you disregarded sect affairs and focused only on your secluded cultivation, he said defiantly. When have you ever been a competent sect leader? What right do you have to question me? Yue Kunchi is a terrible martial artist and a mediocre administrator. Bixia Sect has been long in decline. It's a second or third-rate sect now. If we don't take drastic measures to reform it, then in a few years, the entire sect will disappear from the world. Yuan Shishong was one of our own, and now he's the son-in-law of the king of Goguryeo. Why shouldn't he lead Bixia Sect and restore its former glory? You really are skilled at short-changing people. Everyone here has been fighting for hours, and many even lost their lives. Then, at the last moment, you swoop in to clean up the mess. Just as I'd expect of the sect leader. The winner becomes king, the loser the villain. What else is there to say? Zhao Chiying shook her head and didn't argue with Lu Feng. She'd only told Fan Yuanbai and the rest to take him into custody, then turned to Ren Hailo. Ren Hailo, after your actions today, you owe a blood debt to Bixia Sect, so I will kill you. Do you have anything left to say? Ren Hailo stared unswervingly at Zhao Chiying. Ye Kunchi told me earlier that Huai Lashan said something about me before he passed. It's true, said Zhao Chiying. Before Shifu passed, he told us everything. What did he say? Ren Hailo asked coolly. Probably something about my boundless greed, about how I was unworthy of his kindness. Zhao Chiying shook her head and said slowly, Shifu said that he was the closest to you out of all the martial siblings back then. At the time, Bixia's younger generation was full of talented geniuses. Everyone thought the sect would prosper in your generation's hands. My master and you were the most outstanding of the group, so Shutsu couldn't make up his mind. He didn't know who to appoint as the next sect leader. The contest for the title was exceedingly fierce. Shutsu and the elders issued challenge after challenge, but the two of you overcame them all. I heard that one such challenge involved placing the two of you in different locations, then having both of you rush to Chang'an. First to arrive would be the victor. Wars were widespread then, so the journeys were terribly perilous, fraught with difficulty. My master fell ill in Yi province, and your path happened to take you through there as well. You held up your trip to take care of him, and so, in the end, neither of you was the first to arrive. It was another disciple entirely. As she talked, Ren Hailo, too, seemed to sink into memories of these old affairs. Yes, he was always stubborn and never admitted defeat. No matter what it was, he'd fight to the last. During that race, he fell seriously ill. He was completely unable to get out of bed. If it weren't for that, he'd never have let it hold him up. I just couldn't leave him alone in the inn like that. My master said that he'd always been competitive, even as a child. He was completely obsessed with winning and losing. You were the one who always yielded to him. He never had the chance to thank you properly. Ren Hailo spat a derisive laugh. I don't need his gratitude. He was great at pretending to be the good guy in front of you. I'm sure he's made all sorts of embellishments to his accomplishments. Zhao Chiying ignored the bitterness in his voice and continued. The challenges in the contests for sect leader became increasingly intense. With only victory on his mind, my master cast aside his old friendship and took some dishonorable measures. Yue Kunchi burst out, Shimei! This is what Shitsun told us before he passed, said Zhao Chiying calmly. You heard everything then too. I'm only truthfully conveying his words. But One must absolutely respect their seniors. This concept was deeply ingrained in him. He simply couldn't bring himself to speak ill of his departed Shifu, no matter what. Zhao Zhiying continued. The innocent will remain innocent and sinners will remain sinners. The truth is there forever. It won't disappear with the passage of time. The wrong Shifu committed back then indirectly led to our current state of affairs. As his disciples, we must bear the consequences. This, too, was Shi Tzuan's wish before he passed away. Off to the side, Fan Yuanbai's group was dumbfounded. These old affairs, concealed and little known, had finally come to a conclusion that chaotic night. Zhao Zhiying and Yue Kunshi had only been young disciples then, unable to grasp what was really going on. There was even less to be said about the likes of Fan Yuanbai, who hadn't even joined the sect yet. Zhao Zhiying said to Zhen Hailou, Shifu once told you that you were more capable than he was, that you should be the one to take up the position of sect leader. He said that he wouldn't participate in the contest anymore, and you believed him. So the two of you drank yourselves into a haze, and when you woke up, Shi Tzu's youngest daughter was lying beside you. Shi Tzu thought you'd lost your morals in your drunkenness, and he deemed you unfit for any important role. With no way to exonerate yourself, you asked Shifu to testify on your behalf, but instead he accused you. Before he died, Shifu said that he'd purposely gotten you drunk that night. He also knew Shi Tzu's daughter held a torch for you, so he colluded with her and staged the scene, deceiving Shi Tzu and everyone else. But you were fiery and forthright. In your wrath, you clashed with Shi Tzu, then left the sect in a rage. Zhen Hailou gave a bitter, pained smile. Yes, I'll never forget what happened. How the one I trusted most plotted against me in secret. How he did such things to me. Because of this incident, the sect gradually fell apart. Not long after you left, Zhu Shushong left as well. The sect that had been fading like the setting sun waned even further. Shi Tzu left the position of sect leader to Shifu, but Shifu's heart could never rest. Right before the end, he told us the truth. He said to us that if you ever came back, we must tell you that he owes you half a lifetime of wrongs. Zhen Hailou's face was now deathly pale, and a strange smile bloomed on his face. Owes me? If he owes me, why doesn't he come out himself? Why make you say it? His expression turned savage. Is he still alive after all? He's been hiding in the dark watching us this entire time, hasn't he? Call him out. Call Hui Lishan out. There was a faint, almost indiscernible trace of pity in Zhao Zhiying's eyes. Shifu spent half of his life wallowing in guilt because of what happened. He passed early, unable to cure the sickness in his heart. Zhen Hailou shook his head. Impossible! How could someone as cunning and sly as him die so young? Zhao Zhiying sighed. I fear that even Shifu never imagined that what he owed you would be repaid with the blood of so many Bixia Sect disciples. Each debt should be counted separately. As for the current debt between us, I'll settle it. But it was like Zhen Hailou couldn't hear her. I refuse to believe that he's dead. Where is his grave? Yue Kunshi couldn't take it any longer. When Bixia Sect leaders die, their bodies are cremated and their ashes scattered among the many peaks of Mount Tai. Only their memorial tablet is enshrined in the House of Founders. Have you spent so long as a foreigner that you forgot this too? Zhen Hailou slowly closed his eyes. After a long while, 2 streams of tears flowed down his cheeks, and he spoke no more. Zhao Zhiying said to Fan Yuanbai and the rest, dress your wounds, then search around to see if there are any other disciples still alive. When that's done, shut these people up in separate cells. We'll deal with them some other day. Yes, the disciples quickly replied. Pu Anmi blurted out, my master Kunye will be here soon to visit Sect Leader Zhao. I ask for Sect Leader to release me. We can talk this over. Zhao Zhiying was perplexed. Who is Kunye? She'd been in seclusion for a long time. She'd never even heard of Kunye. My master is the Goktur Kaganate's wise king of the left and the disciple of the Kaganate's Grand Master Hulugu. He's defeated Xuandu Mountain sect leader. He paused to look at Shen Qiao. Ah, yes, it was precisely this sect leader Shen, Taoist Master Shen. Zhao Zhiying furrowed her brows. What exactly is going on here? Yue Kunshi endured the pain of his injuries and briefly explained the ins and outs of the tale. Then he said to Zhao Zhiying, we owe much to Taoist Master Shen. Without him, we would have already lost control of the situation before you arrived. Zhao Zhiying nodded, then cupped her hands at Shen Qiao in thanks. Thank you very much for your help, Taoist Master Shen. Bixia Sect will engrave your great kindness unto our hearts. Sect Leader Zhao is too courteous, said Shen Qiao. There are many matters I must take care of. If Taoist Master Shen has nothing urgent, would you mind resting here in our sect for now? I'll return to consult you once I've finished with other affairs. The incident had been a great blow to Bixia Sect. Of their notable disciples, only Fan Yuanbai and Zhou Yexue remained, and both of them were injured. And then there were the rest, who lay scattered on the ground. It was truly a mournful sight. The corpses of those disciples had to be cleared away, one by one. It was no easy task. Shen Qiao expressed his understanding. Then I'll impose on you for a couple of days. Once Sect Leader Zhao takes care of more important matters, we can talk. Pu Anmi was rather dissatisfied with being ignored. He was about to say something when Zhao Zhiying's sheath struck out and hit his acupoint, successfully shutting him up. What followed next wasn't something Shen Qiao could intervene in. He took Shi Wu to the guest room. No one was available to serve them, and they couldn't ask a great and mighty sect leader like Zhao Zhiying to bring them tea and water. So the disciples stepped up to the task. Little Shi Wu diligently ran in and out the room. Very quickly, he'd boiled Shen Qiao some hot water and returned with a plate full of desserts from the kitchen. Struck between laughing and crying, Shen Qiao pulled Shi Wu down to sit next to him. I'm not hungry. You can eat them all. Shi Wu refused to sit. I'm not hungry either. Shen Shi must be exhausted after all that fighting. I'll massage your shoulders. Shen Qiao stopped his hand. Shi Wu, are you frightened? Shi Wu started, then stammered. No, not at all. Shen Qiao stroked the boy's head. I might have poor eyesight, but my heart hasn't gone blind. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid that I'll abandon you? The rims of Shi Wu's eyes abruptly went red. He lowered his head. For a long while, he didn't speak. At last, he said, I shouldn't be like this. Shifu wanted me to come to Bixia Sect, and I'm finally here. I should be happy, but the moment I remember that you're leaving soon, I just feel terribly sad. Shen Qiao smiled and sighed. Silly boy. He was about to say something else when the sound of commotion came from outside. There was no time for careful consideration. Shen Qiao and Shi Wu left the room and went to look. They followed the noise to the back mountain area. It wasn't far from the rear courtyard they were in, and next to it was Bixia Sect's library and House of Founders. Zhao Zhiying's voice drifted to them in a harsh shout. Ren Hailo, what are you doing? She was a woman of incredible composure, one who wouldn't flinch if a mountain collapsed right in front of her. The way she dealt with everything had left a deep impression on Shen Qiao. But now, something had happened, and it had compromised her level-mindedness. Even her voice cracked. When Shen Qiao and Shi Wu arrived, they saw Ren Hailo standing at the edge of a cliff, his back to them. He was holding a wooden tablet in his arms. The mountain wind wailed, buffeting them until they could scarcely open their eyes. Their robes danced and flapped noisily. Yue Kunzhi's face was pale and green from fury. He looked like he was about to hack up blood. You Ren bastard! Put down Shi Tzuan's plaque right now! Ren Hailo didn't even glance back. He only lowered his head, speaking to the object in his arms. Hui Leshan, you owe me half a life, yet you fled to an early death. What a skillful calculation. I killed countless of your sect's disciples. You must hate me bitterly for that. But it's fine, because I'll repay you with my life. But how are you going to repay me the half a life you owe me? He burst into loud laughter, his face tilted toward the sky. His laughter was laced with endless misery. Huai Shan, how cruel you are! How awfully I hate you! The moment he spoke, he leapt from the cliff. Ah! Someone watching couldn't help themselves from crying out. Everyone stood staring, utterly astonished and speechless. Chapter 50, Aftermath. When Ren Hailo had forced open his acupoints and sprinted toward the House of Founders, everyone thought that the hatred that had built up inside him for more than a decade had finally reached its peak, and that he wanted to take it out on Hui Leshan's tablet. Never could they have imagined a conclusion such as this. Ren Hailo's figure had already vanished from the cliff's edge, but it took a long time for all present to return to their senses. They didn't know whether to sigh or gnash their teeth, but when they thought of the terrible fate of the Bixia sect disciples, they could only heave a deep sigh. A long moment later, Yue Kunshi rasped, "Shimei, Shitsuin's tablet fell down with him. Should we erect a new one for Shitsuin in the House of Founders?" Zhao Chiying was quiet for a while, then said, "Let's leave it for now. We can talk about it later." Then she turned to look at Shen Qiao and Shiwu. "Does Taoist Master Shen have some time? I wish to consult you about something." "Please, go ahead," Sect Leader Zhao. Zhao Chiying saw Shiwu following them, his face tinged with nervousness, and smiled despite herself. "Shiwu should come along too." Shiwu was a little embarrassed. Shy by nature, he first hid his face behind Shen Qiao, then seemed to realize that was a bit rude. He quickly poked himself out again and said, "Thank you, Sect Leader Zhao." Even Yue Kunshi thought Shiwu rather cute, and a snort of laughter escaped him, but he'd forgotten about his internal injuries. Right after laughing, he hissed harshly in pain. "I told you to rest, but you didn't listen," said Zhao Chiying. "In that case, you can come too." Zhao Chiying shook her head, clearly near the end of her rope with this Shishong. She gestured ahead with her left hand. "This way, Taoist Master Shen." She led the three of them to Bixia Sect's Junyang Pavilion. This was where the sect leader would normally entertain honored guests. It had been a long time since the last guest. Few came after Bixia Sect's decline. Entering it, they could smell the faint scent of cold desolation. Shen Qiao and Shiwu had just taken their seats when they saw Zhao Chiying kneel before them with a solemn expression, then bow with her head to the ground in Shen Qiao's direction. "Why are you bowing so deeply?" Shen Qiao was shocked. He stood and moved to pull her up, but Zhao Chiying stopped him. "Shishong and Yuanbai have already told me. You brought Shiwu all the way from Yecheng to Bixia Sect just to fulfill what Zhu Shishong entrusted you with before his passing. A promise is worth 1,000 gold, and you're a man of your word. You deserve this bow of respect from me." Shen Qiao smiled, anguished. "Your honored sect was in the middle of a crisis, so I couldn't explain in full. Sect Leader Zhao and Elder Yue probably don't know, but Zhu Shishong died because of me." He told them how he'd been severely wounded in a battle with Sang Jingxing, and how after his close shave with death, he'd hidden himself in the mountains, how Shiwu had saved him, and how the abbot and his disciples had taken him in, bringing that fatal calamity to their door. For Shiwu, recalling it all again was utterly agonizing. It meant scene after scene of blood and tears. But Shen Qiao had taught him courage, and he was no longer the child who'd burst into tears at the drop of a hat. Now he forced his sorrow down, clenched his hands into fists, and spoke not a single word. Once Shen Qiao was finished, a heavy silence settled over Juyang Pavilion. After a moment, Zhao Chiying said sternly, "These are two separate matters. No one could have predicted Zhu Shishu's death, and it's the last thing you wanted to happen. He walked proudly to this death, so I trust he was perfectly willing. No one could have stopped him, and he achieved what he wanted. How can Taoist Shen say it was because of you? Hu Huan sect knew Zhu Shishong was from Bixia sect, and they still murdered him ruthlessly. This debt is on our head, not yours." The more reasonable she was, the guiltier Shen Qiao became. He was happy to treat others with kindness, and he didn't care how much he gained or lost in exchange. But when other people returned him a similar kindness, to the point that they were willing to die for him, it was far harder for him than simply receiving nothing in the first place. As if sensing Shen Qiao's thoughts, Shiwu reached out to hold his hand. A small patch of warmth lay snug in his palm. Shen Qiao squeezed Shiwu's hand back, enveloping that warmth within his own hand. "I'm very grateful for Sect Leader Zhao's consideration. But I did cause this, so I should be the one to resolve it. It is no concern of Bixia sects." Witnessing their deep affection for each other, as if they couldn't stand apart, Zhao Chiying began to think to herself. At the same time, she said, "Was Zhu Shushu's last request for Shiwu to join Bixia sect?" "Yes," said Shen Qiao. Though Zhushong left the sect for his own reasons and never returned, he'd always considered himself a member of Bixia sect in his heart. Zhao Chiying took the wooden plaque Shiwu handed over and brushed over the Zhu character atop it. For a moment, a trace of sorrow flitted across her face, which was normally so calm and composed. "Once Bixia sect had members who ranked in the top 10 too," she said. But with our internal feuds, our talent waned, declining day after day. What happened today was like piling frost atop snow, disaster on top of disaster. Fan Yuanbai took account just now. Only 6 of our disciples survived. With Zhao Chiying and Yue Kunshi, this only brought their numbers up to 8. What could an 8-man sect even do? If they didn't produce any reasonable, talented disciples, then, even if nobody attacked them again, their sect would be gone within the next decade, leaving only in name. Yue Kunshi's heart ached at her words. He tried, rather unconvincingly, to add another person to their numbers. I have another disciple in Ye Cheng. A memory stirred in Shen Chao. Does Yue Xiong mean Han Ying? Correct, said Yue Kunshi. Her father is the palace attendant of Qi, Han Feng. She's decently talented, but due to her special status, I didn't take her as my personal disciple. I treated her like an external disciple and taught her a little that way. Has Taoist Master Shun met her? I had the pleasure of meeting her once, said Shen Chao. He'd only been able to meet Han Ying because Yan Wushi had saved him, and the only reason he was here now was because Yan Wushi had handed him to Sang Jingxing. All of these causes and effects seemed obscurely interconnected. In the end, perhaps it was impossible to separate any of it from one particular name. Shen Chao suddenly remembered what Pu Anmi had said, that soon Yan Wushi wouldn't be able to save himself. And Bai Zhong had once said something similar. Of course, someone as capricious and unbridled as Yan Wushi had countless enemies, but if you asked Shen Chao who in this world was capable of killing him, he wouldn't be able to think of one. There might be a flaw somewhere in Yan Wushi's martial arts and his demonic core, but he'd already far surpassed the Jianghu's ordinary first-rate experts. It was clear from his duel with Ru Yankehui. If not for the instability in Yan Wushi's demonic core, Ru Yankehui probably wouldn't have walked away with only a few months' worth of healing to do. Qi Fengge was gone, and so was Sui Yu Wang. There was no one who could match Yan Wushi. As strong as he was, even a resurrected Qi Fengge and Sui Yu Wang might not be able to defeat him. But it was clear Pu Anmi already knew of some well-crafted plot. Bai Zhong, too, couldn't have just been speaking nonsense. Shen Chao frowned and pushed these details to the back of his mind for the moment. Now, whenever he recalled Yan Wushi's name, he felt a strange sensation. It was as if he were back in the forest at the foot of Bailong Mountain. That intense state of mind where he blazed with the desire to destroy everything, to perish together with Sang Jingxing, seemed to haunt him, ever present. To dismantle everything and rise anew, it sounded so simple. But it cost him almost half a lifetime of hardship, and he'd had to cross the chasm between life and death itself. He'd been more ghost than man, and from there he'd scaled that 1,000-meter cliff face, crawling to the precipice little by little. Now it was all clear blue skies, but back then the anguish had practically ripped him apart. It'd been a fate worse than death. Shenshi? Shiwu's worried voice floated to him. Shen Chao offered the boy a comforting smile, showing him that there was nothing wrong. Then he said to Zhao Chiying, Shiwu is at Bixia Sect now, safe and sound. What plans does Sect leader Zhao have for him? If this humble Taoist can be of any help, please don't hold back. Let me know. I indeed have a favor to ask of you, said Zhao Chiying. It's about Shiwu. She met Shen Chao's perplexed eyes and said, Shiwu already has a Shifu in Bixia Sect. His Shifu is Zhu Shishu. This fact will never change. No one else, including me, has any right to be Shiwu's Shifu. But I know that Taoist Master Shun must have taught Shiwu much during your journey. If Shiwu still needs someone to guide him as he grows up, to teach him martial arts, then I want that person to be you. Shen Chao was somewhat taken aback. I fear that would go against Zhu Xiong's wishes. Zhao Chiying shook her head. Zhu Shishu wanted Shiwu to return to his sect because he was afraid that Shiwu would have no one to rely on in the future. But with Taoist Master Shun here, Zhu Shishu has no need to worry. Zhu Shishu is gone from this world, but Bixia's gates will always be open to Shiwu. And we won't stop him from taking another master. I can see that Shiwu is clever and talented. At the moment, Bixia Sect is very weak, and we must start over again from nothing. What's more, I'm not very good at guiding disciples. I fear that I'll only waste Shiwu's excellent aptitude. Letting him follow Taoist Master Shun really is the best choice. Then she turned to Shiwu. Shiwu, you haven't officially acknowledged Taoist Master Shun as your Shifu, have you? While we're here as witnesses today, why not take the chance to offer your Shifu a cup of tea? Joy bloomed in Shiwu's face. He had to look at Shenqiao. Can I, Shenshi? Shenqiao couldn't bear to disappoint the boy, so he smiled and nodded. Of course. Shiwu inadvertently let out a low cheer and immediately fell to his knees before Shenqiao. Earnestly, he kowtowed to Shenqiao 3 times, then accepted the teacup Zhao Chiying passed him. He held it above his head in both hands and said brightly, Praise be to Shitsuan. From this day forth, the disciple Shiwu promises to serve his master, study martial arts, and conduct himself with the utmost sincerity. If I ever violate this oath, may the 5 thunders fall upon my head and heaven and earth punish me. Shenqiao watched him, his eyes curved into smiling crescent moons. When Shiwu finished, he took the teacup from him and drank its contents in one go. Then he pulled the boy up and patted the dust from his clothes. A chuckle escaped Zhao Chiying. Zhu Shishu found a truly wonderful Shifu for Shiwu. Taoist Master Shun doesn't treat Shiwu like a disciple, but like his own beloved son. Shiwu's small face flushed red with undisguised joy. With Shenqiao and Shiwu's status as master and disciple officially confirmed, Yue Kunchi turned to more important matters. Just now, Pu Anmi said that his Shifu Kunye will soon arrive, probably to lend him support. When he gets here and discovers that Yuan Hailo is dead and Pu Anmi imprisoned, I fear he'll use it as justification to quarrel. I've heard that Taoist Master Shun has had dealings with Kunye before. What kind of person is he? Can we handle him? Shenqiao took a moment to think before answering. Martially, he's not quite as strong as his Shishong, Duan Wenyang, and he lacks his Shishong's breadth and depth of mind. However, he's still skilled enough to count as a first-rate martial expert. There might be quite the battle. Worry clouded Yue Kunchi's face. If he ascends the mountain by himself, that's one thing. But if he brings the Gokturk's martial experts with him, Bixia Sect only has a few people left. Even with her strength, Shanhe won't be able to hold off all the enemies alone. It'll be fine, said Zhao Chiying. At this point, Bixia Sect has nothing to lose. Though we're cornered, we must fight. Otherwise, all that awaits us is for our names to be stricken from the Jianghu. But Yuan Bai and Ye Xue are still young. Yue Shishong, please take them down the mountain for now, so they can hide and recuperate. Taoist Master Shun should take Shiwu away as well. I was in seclusion for too long, and all responsibilities fell to Shishong. It was a lot of trouble for you. Now I shall undertake everything myself. Yue Kunchi's eyes were red. What are you saying? I'm not leaving. A trace of impatience surfaced on Zhao Chiyi's face. You have serious injuries, and even if you do stay, it won't help the situation. You'll only add to my burden and distract me. It's better for you to leave the mountain with Taoist Master Shun and the rest, instead of wandering around in front of me being a nagging eyesore. Yue Kunchi laughed. I know you're saying this to keep me out of danger, but Bixia Sect has nothing else to lose. So whether we advance or retreat, we'll do it as one. It was my fault the mountain gates were breached today. I absolutely won't withdraw beforehand. Shenqiao spoke up as well. Sect Leader Zhao, Shiwu and I will remain here as well. Zhao Chiying frowned. But you, in the past, I dueled Kunye and fell from a cliff in defeat. Even though there's another story behind that, one which others need not know, a loss is a loss. If there is another chance to fight Kunye now, I will undertake it with everything I have. Please give me this chance, Sect Leader Zhao. And what if I refuse? Asked Zhao Chiying. Shenqiao smiled cheerfully. Then this humble Taoist can only shamelessly loiter here until Kunye shows up. Zhao Chiying stared at him for a long while, then let out a sudden sigh. What has Bixia Sect and I done to be worthy of making a friend like you? There are some who never understand each other in their lifetime, and there are some who become old friends with a single meeting. Jushong gave up his life for me, a stranger he'd met only once. Of course, I'll fight for Bixia Sect as well, and there is indeed some history between me and Kunye. It's not all for Bixia's sake. Zhao Chiying had met Shenqiao only a scant few times. They barely knew each other, but because they'd weathered the crisis at Bixia Sect together, she'd gained an excellent impression of him. And now she saw how bravely he volunteered himself for a sect he had no ties to, and she was overcome with gratitude. I have no words to express how grateful I am for your immense kindness, she said. I shall treasure Taoist Master Shan's friendship and your trouble deep within my heart. I cannot claim that I'll be able to repay it in abundance, but if you ever have need of anything at all, Bixia sect will go through fire and water for you, no matter what. They discussed the matter of Kunye for a while. Once they'd more or less made their decisions, Shenqiao noticed the fatigue on Shiwu's face. He got up and took his leave while the other remained and brought Shiwu back to the guest room. On the way there, Shiwu asked Shenqiao, "Shizun, just now, Sect Leader Zhao talked about keeping your trouble deep within your heart. What trouble was she speaking of? I didn't really understand." Bixia sect has been in steady decline, said Shenqiao. Sect Leader Zhao didn't say as much, but she must feel terribly anxious. She knows that the strong rule in the Jianghu, so she leaps to improve her martial arts, hoping for great achievements. That way she can protect her sect from outside powers. Unfortunately, Lu Feng betrayed them. He colluded with outsiders to launch an assault just as she was at a critical juncture in her cultivation. Sect Leader Zhao was forced to break her meditation. Though she isn't showing it, she's actually suffering internal injuries right now. If she duels Kunye, she has no chance of victory. She knows that I proposed to duel him myself to help her out of this predicament. That's why she said she's grateful for the trouble I went to. Shiwu quietly gasped and felt himself grow nervous. Then what about Shizun? Can you defeat Kunye? I heard that your esteemed self already lost to him once before. Is he very strong? The boy's worry had sent him into a panic, and he spoke thoughtlessly. Anyone else might have first considered whether their words would hurt Shenqiao's pride. Smiling, Shenqiao answered, "He isn't the strongest, but he certainly has his strengths that he excels at. My martial arts haven't fully recovered yet. I cannot say that victory is certain." "What are your chances of winning?" Shenqiao tried to smooth out Shiwu's tightly pinched brows. "About 50-50. Not only did Shiwu's brow fail to smooth out, they pinched together even harder. Shenqiao's words had obviously scared him. Kunye wasn't as strong a martial artist as Duen Wenyang, but he wasn't much weaker. Working with Yu to poison Shenqiao can't cast dishonor over his victory, but his actual skills weren't lacking. If Zhao Chiying faced him uninjured, the fight might end up in a tie. But now it was hard to say. If Shenqiao weren't here, perhaps Bixia sect really would be forced into either protecting the sect to their deaths or preemptively retreating. But if that happened and they retreated, Junan Peak would be occupied by outsiders, and Bixia sect's generations of legacy would be destroyed right then and there. And so what Shenqiao promised was more than a duel or a favor. It was something that might very well preserve Bixia sect's crumbling, battered foundations. Shiwu threw his arms around Shenqiao and buried his head in Shenqiao's chest. "Do you have to fight?" he mumbled. "Your martial arts aren't fully returned." Shenqiao hugged him back. 50-50 doesn't mean I don't stand a chance. If I give the fight everything I have, I can win. When I lost to Kunye, I fell to the lowest point in my life. Regardless of how many reasons or excuses I claim, he's a stumbling block in my path, a personal demon I must face. I stumbled and fell. So now I must learn to stand anew. Do you understand? Shiwu continued to cling to him, saying nothing. It was a long time before he whispered, "I understand. I just don't want anything to happen to you." "Nothing will happen to me," Shenqiao laughed. "I am your Shifu, so I have to live to be 100 years old. I promise to live out Zhu Xiong's share of life as well as my own. When you're a white-bearded old man, this master will still be dragging you around by the ear and lecturing you all day long. Let's see if you find it irritating then." A laugh sputtered from Shiwu. He couldn't help breaking into a smile. Shenqiao sighed and stroked the boy's head. Other masters have their disciples racking their brains for every possible way to show their master respect, and yet my disciple has me racking mine for every possible way to make him happy. I took on such a respected role, yet get no dignity at all. Shiwu was beaming and didn't offer a retort. "You might be the least dignified master," he thought to himself, "but you are the world's best master." Just the thought that he was Shenqiao's disciple was enough to fill him with satisfaction. For 2 days, the foot of the mountain remained quiet and no outsiders arrived. This gave Bixia Sect the time to rest and reorganize themselves. Shiru helped Fan Yuanbai and the others lay to rest the Bixia Sect disciples who died in battle, one by one. After all the blood and slaughter, all that was left of this once lively sect was an empty void. By great fortune, Fan Yuanbai and Zhou Yexue had survived, but there was no joy to be found on their faces. They both grieved for the fellow disciples who'd been lost and were anxious about the fierce battle that might soon arrive. Naturally, they weren't in high spirits. On the third day, the bell outside Zhengyang Pavilion rang, and soon its peals reached everywhere in Bixia Sect. It was a message from the disciples keeping watch over the mid-mountain region. Someone was coming up the mountain, and they couldn't stop him. Understanding the message, everyone rushed to the mountain gates. There, they saw a young man standing with his hands clasped behind his back, dressed in foreign garb. 2 other people followed him, their brows heavy and noses prominent. Their long hair fell to their shoulders, which was pulled into braids, and scarves were wound around their heads. This distinct manner of dress gave their identities away at a glance. "We didn't know that we'd have honored guests coming," Zhao Chiying said sternly. "Please forgive us for not coming out to receive you. I am Bixia Sect leader Zhao Chiying. May I ask this distinguished master's esteemed name?" "Kunye of the Gokturks. I'm here to pick up my unworthy disciple," the man said proudly. Then he studied her with a measuring gaze and shook his head. "You are the Bixia Sect leader Zhao Chiying? Rumors called you an extraordinary talent, the one who revived your sect. But now I see there's not much to you." Fan Yuanbai and others were standing behind her. They glared at him angrily for saying such a thing, but privately, Zhao Chiying was stunned. She suddenly recalled Shen Chao's appraisal of Kunye, that he was highly respected in the Khaganate as well as Hulugu's disciple. Hence, he was incredibly arrogant, but his martial arts were the real deal, and authoritatively so. He wasn't strong enough for the top 10, but he wasn't far from them. Regardless of whether he'd tampered with the duel on Banbu Peak, he wasn't someone who could be trifled with. For Kunye to say something like that the moment they met, it was obvious he wasn't simply belittling Zhao Chiying or trying to provoke her. Rather, he could tell that she was suffering from internal injuries and was no match for him. His eyes were indeed razor-sharp, just as Shen Chao had described. Zhao Chiying's heart sank a little, but she didn't let it show on her face. "So, the Gokturk's wise king of the left has honored us with his presence. Together, your disciple and Dongzhou sect Ren Hailo colluded with Lu Feng, a traitor from our sect, and they slaughtered countless Bixia sect disciples. Can the wise king of the left offer any explanation for this?" Kunye let out a derisive laugh. "Pu Anmi was invited here by the elders of your honored sect. He arrived at the mountain as a guest, yet what awaited him was not fine wines and exquisite delicacies, but the weapons of your honored sect's disciples. As his Shifu, I don't even know whether he's dead or alive. Can sect leader Zhao offer any explanation for that?" Now this was pure sophistry. If Kunye and his disciple hadn't agreed ahead of time that he'd play the fisherman reeling in the net, that he'd come to Bixia Sect and profit off the conflict, then how could he know that Pu Anmi was imprisoned there? Rage surfaced on the faces of the remaining members of Bixia Sect. Zhao Chuyi hadn't killed Pu Anmi after imprisoning him, but she couldn't simply release him either. If word got out that Bixia Sect had yielded to the Gokturks, they'd have little standing left in the Jianghu. What was more, Pu Anmi still needed to repay the blood debt he'd incurred by taking the lives of countless disciples. "You and I both know very well what your disciple has done," Zhao Chiying said coolly. "It's pointless for the wise king of the left to put up such a pretense. As long as a single member of Bixia Sect is still standing, we will not permit you to take Pu Anmi away." Kunye laughed uproariously, like he'd heard some enormous joke. "Zhao Chiying, from what I see, there aren't even 10 disciples standing behind you. Bixia Sect has been a sect in name only for some time. Where do you get the confidence to speak so boldly? If I kill you today, Bixia Sect will completely cease to exist. You can kill people, but you cannot kill their hearts." It was an awfully familiar voice. Kunye's brow twitched involuntarily, and he twisted around to look. A man carrying a sword walked toward him. A face that couldn't have been more familiar, one that Kunye saw even in his dreams, because once he'd fought this man on Banbu Peak. And that duel had caught the eye of the entire world, and with that, Kunye had soared to fame all across the Central Plains. And with that, the man before him had been utterly disgraced and lost all his martial arts. Though he'd been fortunate enough to survive, all that had remained to him for the rest of his life was to waste away, grasping feebly for breath. Shun Chou. Kunye forced this name out between gritted teeth. His voice was layered with emotions so complex even Kunye himself couldn't have described them. I trust that you've been well, Kunye. Shun Chao nodded toward him, the same as he'd done that day on Banbu Peak. But Shun Chao had been a grandmaster then, helming a sect, someone the entire world admired, and Kunye had just entered the Central Plains and hadn't yet made his name. But time had passed and things had changed. Their positions had changed tremendously. Kunye was no longer that Kunye, and Shun Chao was no longer that Xuandu Mountain sect leader. But how was he still so calm? From the moment they came face to face, Kunye closely scrutinized Shun Chao, but he couldn't find even a flicker of misery or dejection. Shun Chao was still the same Shun Chao. He didn't seem to have changed at all. No, he must have changed somewhere. Sect leader Shun, Kunye said suddenly. Ah, no, I can't call you sect leader anymore. Taoist Master Shun. Were you injured in your fall from the cliff? There seems to be something a little strange about your eyes. Yes, said Shun Chao, although my eyes have nothing to do with this fall. Joyful reunion calls that. As for why and how, surely you know better than I do. Kunye shook his head. You should blame your Shurdi, Yu Ai. He was the one who poisoned you, not me. I challenged you to a duel, sent you a letter sincerely and honestly, then fought you openly and honestly on Banbu Peak. Everyone saw it. I never made any dishonest moves. He looked at the sword in Shun Chao's hand and chuckled. Did you wait for me here because you were dissatisfied with your defeat? Or are you just standing up for Bixia Sect even though it has nothing to do with you? The affairs of the past are like the waters passing by. They cannot be returned. I've waited for you here for one purpose, to ask you for a duel. Dare you accept my challenge? Slowly, he drew his sword from its sheath and let it hang, its point toward the ground and lightly quivering. Shimmering sunlight glinted, dazzling off the metal. The mocking look on Kunye's face faded, and his expression became incomparably stern. He, too, drew the saber from his back. This battle was destined to happen. It had only been a matter of when. Kunye felt a thrill running through his bones. Though he'd defeated Shun Chao before, deep inside his heart, joyful reunion rankled at him too. Misgivings about how his victory was achieved remained. This time, he'd make Shun Chao wholeheartedly accept defeat. All right, everyone, that concludes the reading of chapters 48 through 50 of Thousand Autumns Volume 2, also known as Qian Qiu. Just a couple words I wanted to share. First off, I have to say I really, really love the relationship and the bond that has formed between Shiwu and Shun Chao. Again, we discussed toward the end of last video how they ended up meeting each other. And, you know, I just like how everything is cyclical. Like, it all comes together. It's all interconnected. One of the things that Shun Chao was thinking about Yan Wushi. But I love that he's acting now as like a father to Shiwu and his master. Just these couple of interactions between them, we get to see a more fatherly side of Shun Chao, and I absolutely love it. Also, I feel really bad for Bixia Sect, especially the survivors, Fan Yuanbai and Zhou Yexue, and even Zhao Chiying. I'm sure, like, they are going to have survivor's guilt because literally all of the other disciples were killed, and yet these two disciples are the ones that are still living. That has to weigh heavily on them. So anyway, I won't say any more. The next video will be the reading of the last two chapters, and then we'll be on to book 3. So I will see you guys next time.